We're going to be checking the water supply piping for the flow and also to make sure that it's working in all areas of the house. We'll be checking to make sure that the drains work properly, the waste drain works properly, and the vent piping are all connected and working properly. We'll be checking to make sure the faucets are correctly attached. The hot water goes to the hot water faucet, the cold water goes to the cold water faucet, and that they're all working correctly. We'll be checking that the fuel gas piping is correctly installed, there's no safety issues, and that we're able to operate the different fuel operated appliances correctly. We'll be checking the water heaters to make sure that they're safely installed and working properly. Functional flow in the shower is making sure that the shower water does not greatly change in terms of the volume of shower water coming through when you flush the toilet or use some other kind of appliance. So we'll be checking everything in the house for functional flow and functional drainage. This is the water heater. Typically I start from the top to make sure that the venting is correct. I'm going to also check that the piping is correct and done in the right way. I'm going to check the straps here to make sure the earthquake straps are installed correctly and they're the proper type. I'm going to check the gas piping that comes in to make sure that's done correctly. Typically I'll turn on the water heater to make sure it works correctly and the flame looks good underneath. Also in this case there's a safety pole here so that it cannot be run into by a car. So we're going to check the general visual inspection of the water heater. The most typical thing that's wrong is that there's not proper strapping. I'm going to take a look at the temperature relief valve to make sure that it's piped out correctly to the outside, the correct kind of piping's put in there. I'm going to check and make sure the venting's in correctly, that it's not loose. Make sure there's no kind of backflow issue with vent gas from the water heater coming into the house. And do a good visual check to make sure there's no water leakage issues here. As I come into the bathroom, I'm going to check to make sure that the outlets work correctly and they're GFCI protected. Make sure all the mirrors are attached correctly. I'm going to take a look at the tiles to make sure there's no cracks in the tiles. Turn on the water and check underneath the sink to make sure that there's no kind of leaks or any kind of past leaks that are under here. A lot of times you can see moisture under there or what looks like black growth under there. Typically I'll leave that on for a while to make sure it doesn't make any kind of drips or leaks. I'll also check to make sure that the hot water is on the correct side and cold water is on the correct side. I also open and close all the drawers to make sure they work correctly. In this case there's another sink, so I'll also check that. On the toilet, I'm going to flush the toilet and make sure there's no kind of water leakage. Make sure everything's working correctly. Put my leg up against it and give it a good push to make sure it's not loose at the floor. This one looks pretty good. And I'm going to go on also to the shower, take a look at all the shower tile, make sure there's no kind of cracks, no kind of water leakage. Down by the corner by the floor, if it was a wood floor, I'd make sure that that wasn't any kind of water damage down there. I'll go ahead and turn on the fixtures, make sure they work correctly, make sure the hot is on the correct side and the cold's on the correct side, make sure the shower works well. Also another thing we're going to check is to make sure there's enough water coming out even when I flush the toilet. This is a newer home so it's not an issue, but on some older homes actually it's a functional flow issue. You could be in the shower and someone will flush the toilet and then you'll get scalded by hot water, so I want to check that. Then I'll do a good overall visual of the whole inside of the bathroom. We'll be checking the electrical service as it comes into the house to make sure that it's correctly installed and there's no safety issues. We'll be inspecting the electrical panel or panels to make sure that the sizing is correct and there's no major safety issues. We'll be checking the circuit wiring to make sure that it's the correct size, it's grounded, and that there's no major safety issues. We'll be checking to make sure that the switches, receptacles, outlets, and lighting fixtures are properly installed, are not broken, loose, or causing any kind of electrical hazard situation. Now we're going to take a look at the electrical panel. Open the cover. We're going to take a look and make sure everything's labeled correctly. We're going to take a look and make sure that there's one wire per breaker. We're going to look for any kind of past damage, any kind of melting. Visually inspect everything. If there's anything that's unusual, we'll typically refer it out to an electrical contractor to take a look at it. For the faceplate covers for the light switches, I'm just going to check those, make sure nothing's broken, make sure each light switch works. Sometimes there's mystery switches, you don't know what they're connected to. And then I'm going to check this on everyone in the house to make sure it works correctly. Also, I'm going to check to make sure it's not hot. Sometimes they get hot because they're wired incorrectly or they're old and they need to be replaced. When I check the outlets, I'm going to make sure there's no damage, make sure that it's not loose, it's securely connected. I'm going to use a tester to make sure that it's grounded properly and that both of them are working. And I'm going to do this typically with everyone in the house to check it. Also, in each bathroom, I'm going to be noting what kind of venting system there is. In this case, it's through the ceiling, so I'm going to check to make sure that works. In this case, make sure that the light works, it works correctly. I'll be noting whatever kind of vent system it is. In some bathrooms, it's just a window to the outside. We'll operate the heating equipment to make sure that it's functioning properly. We'll operate the central cooling equipment to make sure it's functioning properly. We'll be checking the heat equipment and central cooling equipment to make sure that it's properly connected to the electrical source and that they're fused correctly. We'll be making sure that there's sufficient air coming in for combustion for the heating and cooling equipment, and also correct exhaust systems in place. The central cooling equipment produces water that has to be drained out of the attic or wherever the cooling system is. So we'll be checking those pipes to make sure that they're functioning correctly. We'll be checking the vents and the ducts to make sure that they're set up correctly and they're distributing the cool air throughout the house or the heating air throughout the house. On an AC unit, the first thing I'm going to check is to see what amp fuse it has on here, and then I'm going to check to make sure it's the correct corresponding size amp fuse here. I'm going to check for any kind of electrical wires that are loose, and then once I have it turned on, I'll check for any kind of strange noises, and then give it a good visual. Also, when I'm checking the AC unit, I'm going to check the wiring to make sure this is connected. Sometimes this comes off and there's loose wiring. I'm going to check it to make sure when it connects here, this is connected well, there's no kind of exposed wiring. Sometimes a dog will come and pull something off, so I'm just going to check to make sure there's no exposed wiring here and everything looks correctly connected. This is the primary condensate line for the AC unit, and I'm going to be taking a look at this to make sure that it's all connected correctly. And typically when the AC unit's going on, is turned on in the attic, there'll be a little bit of water coming out here. And I'll also show you the secondary condensate line, which is typically over a window. We have the primary condensate line over here, and then I'm going to come over to check the secondary condensate line, which is typically over a window. As I'm walking over here, I'm going to be checking the stucco for any kind of cracks, checking the window, also checking the eaves. Up in the attic, there's the AC unit gives off a little bit of water, and that water is being taken out in two lines, a primary condensate line and a secondary condensate line. The secondary line is put above a window so that if it starts having water come out and drip on the window, you know you need to call an HVAC person to take a look at that condensate